Morena koutou. That's all working. I ngā mana, I ngā reo, I ngā rangatira mā. Nau mai, haere mai, piki mai, ki tēnei kaupapa, kanui te mihi ki a koutou katoa. Me karakia tātou. Hokiria whenua, he kukune mai tanga, he waihotanga tā papa. Parangia te nukuroa huranga, he rehutai tā tangaroa, he tihei tā tānei. Teria ngā kapua, kohia he kitia rangi, I te rapunga tikitira, kāwea aki, ka au, ka awatea. Ko wai au, no ingarangi o ki tupuna, ko Jobson toku whānau no Tarawhitia hau, kei Tamaki Makaurau toku kāinga inaine, he Associate Dean Researcher hau, ko Nicola Kays, taku ingoa nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to our 2024 Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences Roadshow. This is the third year that we have run this event. I want to particularly welcome the external guests who are with us today, many of whom you will meet in the panel discussion in our second session. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nicola Kays. I'm Associate Dean of Research in our faculty. For those of you who only know me as the Associate Dean of Research, I am also Professor of Rehabilitation and Co-Director of the Centre for Person-Centred Research, which is where my research journey started. My background is in health psychology, and my research is really primarily focused on how the ways we work with people can optimise outcomes that matter to them. And this rangahau mahi really resonates with the theme of AUT Research Week, which is Partnerships for Impact. Our program has been designed with that theme in mind, Partnerships for Impact, and through the course of today you will hear formal presentations from a range of our AUT whānau, our faculty whānau. We will hear some insights and experience and tips from our external partners who will be gathering for a panel discussion in our second session. In the exhibition session out in the atrium, there are a range of research groups who will be exhibiting their work today. One of the things to keep in mind when you move out into the atrium today is that each exhibition session will be refreshed. So even if you get around all the exhibitions in the first exhibition session, there will be new people out there in the second and third session. So there's more for you to see and do and learn and people to engage with. On the slide behind me is a whakatauki. No te roro, naku te roro, ka ora ai te iwi. With your food basket and my food basket, the people will thrive. This whakatauki talks to community, talks to collaboration. It acknowledges that everyone has something to offer, and if we value, recognise and draw on the collective strength, skills, expertise and experience of all, we will flourish together. I couldn't think of a better whakatauki to communicate the theme of our roadshow today. Make the most of today. Go and visit the research groups in the exhibition area. Listen, learn, reflect and engage with the speakers in the room today. Go and talk to the library research services and AUT Ventures who will have desks in the atrium area, and they can talk to you about what they do and how they can help you in your research endeavours. Have a go at our Research Roadshow bingo. This is designed to help you connect with people that you have not already connected with and to learn something new about the people that you think you already knew. You never know, a conversation over a bingo square could be the seedling of your next partnership for impact. There are 2 gift baskets up for offer, so if you complete your bingo card, pop it in the box at the registration desk and make sure you're here to listen to our final speaker of the day, Sir Richard Fall, who is closing us with a fireside chat today with Brett Cowan. After that happens, we will draw out the bingo winner and the gift basket winners. If you need anything at all, just look for these sparkly ties or bow ties. So every member of our Faculty Research Committee and members of our postgraduate research team will be wearing these ties, and they are the people that you need to go to if you have questions for the day. If you're stuck and you want to be introduced to someone but you can't muster the courage to do it on your own, please go to one of these people. Let us introduce you. I think that is about all I need to tell you, except for enjoy the day. Use this as an opportunity to celebrate the research that we do as a faculty and to learn something about what we are collectively doing. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou katoa. Before I close, I'm going to introduce our Dean, Brett Cowan, who is going to open us with an address today. And Brett, I'll invite you up here. I should add that this is Brett's first roadshow. So we have to make this the best ever roadshow experience for him.
I'm Brett, and Nick asked me to speak this morning, and I asked her what I should speak about, and she said, well, you could talk about research in the faculty, or you could say whatever you like. So I'm going to go with the second of those options. And what I want to do is to lift us from the detail that we're often embedded in when we do research up to some of the bigger megatrends that are sort of dominating world thinking and are likely to be a significant part of our future. And so I've chosen two things, artificial intelligence and also misinformation. And actually there's some connections between those two things. I worked in artificial intelligence for many years. Actually, I got out of it just as it became trendy, and now I get to talk about it. So to get us underway, the first thing I want to do is just to have this quote, which comes from the World Health Organization, to help frame up the talk, and that is, artificial intelligence can be misused to generate and disseminate highly convincing disinformation in the form of text, audio or video content that is difficult for the public to differentiate from reliable health content. So that's just a part of an overall framing. Now I want to take us into artificial intelligence and to talk a bit about this, but before we get to some of the details, I want to start with a little bit of thinking about thinking. So we perceive thinking as perhaps a somewhat unique human endeavour, and this domain of study, thinking about thinking, actually has a name. It's called metacognition, and that name was coined by this guy, John Flavel. And if we think back to the Industrial Revolution, it amplified our physical prowess, but it did it in many different ways. If we're working on a farm, we might think of a tractor. If we're doing microsurgery, where we're trying to guide very small movements in neurosurgery, you might think about a Da Vinci robot. Or if we're travelling, we might think about a spacecraft. And these are all quite different embodiments of what the Industrial Revolution has created. So when we think about artificial intelligence, there's also quite a lot of different types of thinking that we perform. There's on one end, there's mathematics and mathematical logic. 1 + 1 is 2. If we come across a little bit, we might think about computer programs, still quite a formalised way of thinking. Then maybe legal or scientific language, but then as we move to the far other side, we encounter fiction or maybe poetry and music. So just as in the Industrial Revolution there were many different dimensions of physical activity, there are many different types of thinking that AI might have an application to. Just before we move on, I also just want to make a comparison between human thinking and computer thinking. And I want to use an example. If we think about file transfer on a computer, we've got a video and we want to transfer it from one computer to another computer. How long might that take? Well, milliseconds probably, if not microseconds. And let's compare that to humans. Let's say on this side we've got a fully qualified nurse who embodies all of that experience and knowledge, and we want to transfer it to another human that we'd like to become a nurse. How long does that take us to achieve? And of course the answer is years and years of activity. So in some ways computers are already well beyond what humans are able to achieve. If we think about computational ability, the ability to do mathematics, if we think about the ability to do things in parallel. In this room, there's one person speaking and many listening. But of course, in a computer network, you can simultaneously have many computers speaking and many computers listening. So here's the briefest history of artificial intelligence, and we're going to start in 1950 with Alan Turing and the famous Turing test. And the Turing test is if I have a person who's asking some questions and they ask it on the one hand of a computer in a room or on the other hand of a human in a separate room, when those answers come in, the Turing test is can the person asking the questions determine whether it was a computer or a human that was answering? And actually this has fallen out of favour a bit because it's sort of analogous to saying if there's a duck flying past, can I fool the duck into thinking there's another duck if an aircraft flies by? So it's sort of a question of creating similarity rather than capability. In 1956, the term artificial intelligence was first used and it's sort of an 8-week Dartmouth summer research project when a whole lot of people get together. So artificial intelligence really saw its genesis back in the 1950s, and the term machine learning that you might have heard was back in 1959. So it's been around for a pretty long time. The first chatbot, Eliza, which was able to have sort of a psychotherapeutic conversation with a person, was launched. And then in 1975, the first AI program in medicine. This was a program that tried to determine what bacteria was infecting a person and what might be the best choice of antibiotic. And if we jump forward to 2011, there was a very famous event when IBM Watson, a very big computer, defeated the world's best player of Jeopardy. Now, Jeopardy was a very popular TV program, and they essentially gave you a whole lot of answers, and you had to figure out what was the place or the person or the activity that connected them together. And the world champion lost to a computer. FDA cleared the first sort of cloud-based deep learning algorithm. And then we get the first image processing approval from the FDA, 2018, looking at diabetic retinopathy. This is for those of you that do proteins, this is a program that figures out how proteins fold in space. And then, of course, something that we'll be speaking about a bit more, the launch of ChatGPT in 2022. All right, so this is one slide where I'm going to explain to you how a neural network works. So just hang in there. I'm sure we'll get it through. Now, on the left-hand side, we've got a slide of the human brain, and these are pyramidal cells in the human sort of superior occipital gyrus. And that was the sort of sense of inspiration for artificial neural networks. And here we see the cell bodies, the axons on the dendrites that connect these neurons together as a network. So what I'm going to do is we're going to use a car problem. We're going to try and see if we can train a neural network to work out how much a car might cost, how fast it might accelerate, and a couple of other things. So here's our neural network, and you see that it looks a lot like the neural network that we see in the brain. So what we have on the left-hand side is where we're going to provide our input. You can think of that as the ears of the neural network. And then we have all these hidden middle layers, we'll come to those in a moment, and then we have an output layer, which is the spoken voice, if we're to use that analogy. And so here's our problem. On the output layer, we want to determine the fuel economy of a car, we want to determine its acceleration, and we want to determine its price. Now, we're going to use some data on the input, and that includes the make, so BMW, Holden, and so on. And we're going to use some other things such as engine size, weight, colour, and the number of seats. Now, the way a neural network works is that those input parameters are fed through these layers until we get what we want. Now, you might have heard about training a neural network. So what is training of the neural network? Well, what we do is we get 1,000 examples where we know the make, the engine size, the weight, the colour, and the number of seats. But for these 1,000 examples, we also know exactly what the fuel economy, acceleration, and price is. And this is called our training data set. And we're going to feed our training data set into this where we already know the answer to train the network. And what that boils down to is you see all these arrows, and they are connections between these nodes. And in training the neural network, all we're going to do is assign a number to every one of the arrows in our neural network. And we're going to assign the numbers. That means when we feed in our input data by going through these mathematical calculations, we'll get the right answer on the other end. So I've assigned 4 to engine size, and I've assigned 0.1 to colour, because actually colour doesn't have much effect on fuel economy, acceleration, and price. And so the training of a neural network is the identification of a number for all of these connections. And in this neural network, if you count up all of those arrows, there are about 90 numbers. So we feed in our 1,000 training data set examples, and we optimize the best numbers on all of those arrows so that fuel economy comes out the other end. Now, what about ChatGPT? That actually uses words. So on the left-hand side, we might have, I drove my car on the, so each of those dots is one of those words. And on the other end, instead of determining fuel economy, acceleration, and price, it predicts the next word. So the next word might be the road, it might be the moon, it might be the beach. And so a neural network for ChatGPT uses this basic principle to work out what the next words are likely to be. Now, this neural network has 90 of those connections, and we can train that relatively quickly. But as you'll see in a moment, this will become more difficult with ChatGPT. Now, when you see this, you can see that explainability becomes a problem. Because if I said, how did you figure out what the price was? It's a bit hard. I just had all these numbers in this neural network. There wasn't a line of computer code that if I was an autonomous vehicle that said, if red lights stop, we just don't have that. It's just these weights and numbers. All right, so what I'm going to do now is talk to you about the complexity of these models. So this is the number of connections. Remember those arrows where I assigned a number to each arrow? This is how many connections are now in these neural networks. My neural network had 90, and now we see that ChatGPT-1 had 100 million of those connections. And then when that developed to ChatGPT-2, that increased, and this is a logarithmic scale, so between each of these is 1,000 times more. Then we go up to ChatGPT-3 and then ChatGPT-4, which actually has about 1 trillion of these numbers, these weights in its model. Now, that sounds like a lot, but if we come back to our analogy with the human brain, where are we at? Well, here's the ant brain in terms of the number of connections within an ant brain. Here is the rat brain, and here is the human brain. So the human brain has about 100 times more connections compared to the parameters with ChatGPT-4. Now, when you're optimizing that many, 1 trillion parameters, it takes not minutes, it takes weeks and months, and it costs about $100 million ballpark. So you don't want to retrain your model too often. So what's the amount of data? Remember, we put in the data, our 1,000 training data sets. How much data, how many words are going into the training of these models? And you can see that the number of words that went into ChatGPT-4 is well over 1 trillion words. So what does that mean in perspective? Well, down here at about 1 billion is the number of words that a human will read or hear in their lifetime. Here is the English Wikipedia in its totality, and here are all the human written texts that have ever been written. And this is again a logarithmic scale, but you can see that ChatGPT-4 is heading towards a very large number of words in its training. So how quick is the adoption of these sorts of technologies? And there's a comparison here. If we start with Google Translate, something that was launched a few years ago now, it took 78 months for it to reach 100 million users. If we come back to Uber, that took about 70 months to get 100 million users. Telegram, a social media, never used Telegram by the way, it's not a great platform, took 61 months. Spotify, the music app, 55 months. Pinterest, about 41. Instagram, about 30 months. TikTok, about 9 months. And ChatGPT, about 2 months. And actually, there's a new thing called Threads on Instagram, which is launched, and I think it took 2 or 3 days to get to 100 million users. So the speed with which these things are now being deployed is accelerating. I've talked about artificial intelligence in a sense that you imagine it's about pictures and data, but I want to talk about an area which is medical imaging. And in medical imaging, we get scans, MRI scans perhaps, and what we do is we have a scanner that rolls off some raw data, and you'd think that would be determined by the physics, and there would be signals and computers and digitization. From the raw data, we create our images, and then from the images, we might do some clever things like segmentation. We might separate out the white and grey matter in the brain, for example. We might do some computer-aided diagnosis that helps us understand from the images what the problem is, and then a radiologist, a human, gets involved, and then finally we write a report. In general, it's been sort of assumed that this is the area where AI has its greatest impact. That is, once we have our images, we ask AI to identify regions, help us with the diagnosis, and so on. But more recently, and that's true, so AI is used in that pipeline, and actually it's pretty clear now that AI is better than radiologists in many diagnoses. But the thing that's happened, not recently, but over the last 10 or 15 years, is that AI has moved back into this area. So AI is actually determining which pieces of data to acquire. And if you change the AI parameters in that acquisition of data, in fact, you can make lesions appear and disappear on the images. So whilst we've thought of AI as something that fits on the right-hand side of medical imaging, in fact, AI is integrally involved in determining which pieces of data to acquire, and that, of course, has an impact on the image. All right, changing gear now. This is I feel obliged to put some research in for a research day. This is a comparison which came out in JAMA, which is a very respected medical journal, that compares a physician, a doctor, and artificial intelligence chatbot responses to patient questions. So what they did was that they looked on Reddit and they found a site where people ask medical questions. and they selected 195 of these medical questions. And on that site, they verify who is a doctor or a physician and who isn't. And then they have answers that are given by physicians or doctors. So all of them have an answer from a verified physician. And then they said, well, let's just feed each of them into ChatGPT and see what happens, in terms of the answer from ChatGPT. And then they did this evaluation of whether a physician or ChatGPT was better on two metrics. Metric number one is quality, that is the answer accurate and high quality? And the second one is on empathy, which is perhaps a more innately human trait. So if we have a look at the results, so I'll give you an example of the question, just so you get an idea. Here's a question that says, what's the risk of going blind following bleach being splashed into an eye, resulting in an irritated and dry eye? Probably submitted by someone who just splashed bleach in their eye. Here's the physician response. Sounds like you'll be fine. You should flush the eye any time you get a chemical or foreign body in the eye. You can also contact poison control. The ChatGPT result was, I'm sorry to hear that you got bleach splashed in your eye. It's important to rinse the eye as soon as possible after a chemical splash to remove as much of the chemical as possible and to prevent further irritation or change. If you're experiencing significant pain, redness or vision changes, it's unlikely you will go blind from getting bleach splashed in the eye, but it's important to take care of the eye and seek medical and so on. So you get the idea. So let's have a look at the results. So first of all, on the quality. So here's the quality. So this is very poor, poor, acceptable, good, very good. And you can see that the ChatGPT quality is significantly rated higher by expert assessors than the physicians. So then the question becomes, well, what about the empathy of the result? And here you see basically that the chatbot empathy significantly exceeded the physician empathy. So some of these more uniquely human things are actually being overtaken by ChatGPT. There is a medical school overseas using artificial intelligence to help train empathy into medical students. Now, if we look across some of the dimensions, and I'm going to give you a scale on this, so don't panic. What we're looking at here is a report, the Artificial Intelligence Index report. It's published by Stanford. It's about 500 pages long. I just have one graph at it. It's a very good report. And on the y-axis, we have the performance of AI relative to a human. So the dotted line is a human, and then we see this over time. And each of these lines represents a different sort of thinking. And I'm going to come to that in a moment. And you can see that mostly artificial intelligence is converging to be about as good, or in some cases a little better, and in some cases a little worse. So let's just take a look at these. The first one here, the blue line across the top, is image classification. So that's a test where you present a whole lot of pictures, and the aim is to say what's in the picture. So here we've got a baseball player, we've got ice cream, lemon, and so on. And that can be done by a human and by artificial intelligence. And you see that AI is already better than humans at that. The second one down here, where AI has lagged behind but is rapidly increasing, is competition mathematics. So competition mathematics, and I'll take the bottom example here. So here's a not such a difficult problem. Equation x squared plus 2x equals I is two complex solutions. Determine the product of their real parts. For those of you into maths, that can be solved using the quadratic equation. But there's also a more elegant solution, which is termed completing the square. So that's what that green line is, that kind of mathematical problem. And this is a solution provided by AI. And you can see that that is not yet at the level of human performance, but not far from it. The last one in the pink there, it's a little difficult to see, is visual reasoning. And that's this sort of problem where we say, what sign is this? And the answer is handicap or one way. What is the dog wearing? And the answer is a life jacket or a collar. So you present the picture. And not to, just to sort of wrap up this part of the talk, I also just wanted to connect us to the robotics part. So I've talked a lot about AI, but I just wanted to show you an example. This comes from Boston Dynamics. They make robots, and this is just a video, which I hope will play, just of one of their robots. Not so hard, but now a bigger step. Turning around. So this just starts to give us some sense of the capability when we think about robotics. We might think of robots as little things on wheels wandering around. And this is kind of an old video. That's technology from about 10 years ago. Video was made in 17, but the technology, this is called the Atlas machine, was a couple of years before that. So we're also just getting a sense of what this is looking like. Okay, I'm going to change gears now from AI and a little bit of robotics to misinformation. And misinformation is actually incorrect or misleading information, but it's not created with the intent of hurting others. And this is in distinction to disinformation, which is deliberately created to sort of deceive or to mislead. And I was very involved in the COVID response, and misinformation was an important part of that. So what I've done is to connect the two together, I asked ChatGPT to provide an interesting conspiracy theory about toasters. Can I go back? And here's what I got. According to this conspiracy theory, toasters possess a secret sentient intelligence that is slowly gaining control over humanity. The theory suggests that toasters are not merely appliances, but a part of a larger interconnected network silently communicating with each other. Supporters of this theory claim that toasters strategically burn toast as a means of sending coded messages to one another. They believe that the rising popularity of smart toasters is a deliberate ploy to integrate toasters further into our lives, allowing them to gather data and monitor our activities. Furthermore, proponents argue that the occasional electrical fire caused by toasters are not accidents, but intentional acts of defiance by rogue toasters seeking to assert their independence. And then it says, while this conspiracy theory is purely fictional and imaginative, it serves as a humorous reminder to approach conspiracy theories with skepticism and critical thinking. All of that was written by ChatGPT. So it's just interesting to reflect that ChatGPT has been trained on human data from the internet, and we're quite critical of ChatGPT. It kind of has hallucinations, it says that things that really aren't true, it fabricates, there's bias, there's inaccuracies and lying. Quite a lot like humans, as it turns out. And so, in a way, ChatGPT is simply reflecting back to us like a mirror the strengths and weaknesses of human behaviour. So in some ways, is it ChatGPT that is the problem, or perhaps the training data set itself? So I want to just gain a bit of perspective now about misinformation, and this is a really interesting report, the World Economic Forum 2024 Global Risk Report. Now, this is written by the people who do the Davos conference. You might have heard that. All the leaders from countries go to this Swiss ski resort and talk about problems facing the world. It's a very important group. And this report took a survey of about 1,500 academics, business leaders, government and community leaders to determine what are the risks facing the world in 2026 and in 10 years' time in 2036. And they divide their risks up into economic, like inflation, environmental, like climate change, geopolitical, like conflict, societal, like erosion of human rights, and technical, like cyber attacks. And 2 years ago, last year, in 2023, this report had these risks in order as the most important short-term, meaning in 2 years' time, risks. And then they also did it for 10 years, and these are the long-term risks in 10 years. And you'll see that misinformation last year, 2023, was ranked number 16, misinformation and disinformation was number 16 for 2-year outlook and number 11 for the 10-year outlook. So just bear those figures in mind, 16 and 11. Of course, they've done the report again this year. The 2024 report looking forward 2 years to 2026. And what are the top risks this year? So here in 10th, 9th, 8th, 7th and 6th place, you see pollution, economic downturn, inflation, lack of economic opportunity. 5th, interstate armed conflict. 4th, cyber insecurity. 3rd, society polarisation. 2nd, extreme weather events. And this year, 2024, misinformation and disinformation is actually ranked as the most significant likely impact severity threat to the world by this very well-respected think tank. And then the 10-year, you see that misinformation and disinformation is about 5th. So as we look at the current risk landscape, a slightly different question here. What are the risks most likely to present a material crisis on a global scale in 2024? And here are the bottom 5, and as we work our way up, we see that the thing most likely to present a material crisis in 2024, extreme weather is ranked as number 1, and number 2, which starts to draw the themes of this talk together, is AI-generated misinformation and disinformation. And this is a cloud of all of those different things showing the connections between some of the larger ones. And if we just focus our attention up in the top right there is misinformation and disinformation, we see that we have cyber insecurity, adverse outcome of frontier technologies, meaning AI, censorship and surveillance. And you can see the connections most strongly to societal polarisation, erosion of human rights, interstate violence, terrorist attacks, and all the way over here, probably related to COVID, infectious diseases. Now, I'm conscious that actually I was going to talk a bit about the psychology of misinformation. Perhaps I'll just do a couple of slides and then I'll skip to the end. So one of the things about the psychology of misinformation is that people's views are set in stone and it's very hard to change their minds. And I was discussing this with an eminent expert in this area, that it was very hard to change other people's minds, particularly when they were going down the conspiracy sort of route. And that esteemed expert said, a bit like us really, that we ourselves are pretty hard to change our mind. And my wife Tammy contributed that insight. So the interesting thing when we think about misinformation is kind of this is how we think. We see things out in the world. So we see vaccines save lives, vaccines are safe, COVID isn't real, 5G is making us sick, vaccines kill people, vaccines damage immunity, you need one dose, it's unknown safety for children, I won't get COVID, and so on. And we use our reason, our discussions with colleagues, and we use our thinking, and we fact check, and we ultimately come up with our worldview. That's perhaps how we imagine, at least, that we think. Unfortunately, and then we of course link back to we bring those things into our worldview. Unfortunately, it's actually not really how we think. What we tend to do is that we start with our worldview, and then which might be we're a QAnon follower, or the best treatment is bleach, and then we look for alignment or agreement in all of the things out of the world, and when we find that alignment or agreement, we then incorporate those into our worldview. So actually the way we think is not as logical and systematic as we perhaps imagine. We tend to choose the facts that align with our pre-existing worldview. And then when we have our worldview, the transfer of information to others is actually kind of a social event rather than an academic event, perhaps, except in this forum. And so we tend to spread information, perhaps not because it's true, but because it's interesting. And in this study from Plus One, sharing of disinformation is related to maybe the message or maybe the viewer. Maybe it's the authority of the source, maybe it's the number who have previously engaged with it, might be a level of digital literacy, maybe we think it's likely to be true, maybe it's consistent with pre-existing attitudes. And there's a lot of variability in this research, but the reasons that disinformation is shared is nothing to do with the authority of the source, nothing to do with people who've engaged with it, nothing to do with digital literacy. It's because it's thought likely to be true and is consistent with pre-existing attitudes. So simply talking about the evidence is insufficient in the context of how humans think and act on information. So this makes it difficult to convince others of alternate views. And this is nearly my last slide. But this is a very good book, by the way, by Jess Brenson-Shaw, 2018. And if we really want to convince others of a different view, we have to readjust our beliefs regarding how we acquire knowledge. There are much deeper pieces that relate to belief, social group, emotion, and worldview rather than logic than we think. We use those worldviews to ease our cognitive load, and sometimes if something doesn't fit in that worldview, it's really hard to get it into someone's worldview. So you mustn't mistake your own prioritised values and beliefs for your audience's values and beliefs. Clearly, it's important to foster critical thinking. Sometimes vaccination works, so tell people what they might expect in terms of misinformation and who will say it, and then when they see it, they may be immunised against it. But to debunk false information and avoid repeating and addressing the false information, you have to kind of create a new narrative. Stories are much more memorable than facts. And we, of course, have to be honest about our own biases. So what's the road ahead for us? And I've shown this cartoon in the faculty forum. As we think about the world, here's an example of a king who's got his castle and there's an attack coming and he's prepared for the attack. And unless we think carefully about the future and the differences that it will bring, we will be subject to the problem, bad news, Your Majesty, it's a cyber attack. And you can see that there's the absolutely correct preparation for an event that actually is no longer relevant. So in summary, we tend to, particularly in Western approaches, narrow our science down to smaller and smaller pieces until we have a tiny piece that we specialise in. So part of the message here is that we do need to consider some of the broader and wider contexts that inform our world and will create our future, such as climate change, quantum computing, energy security, and of course AI and misinformation. This helps us transcend to this transdisciplinary approach where we see the need to engage more broadly and widely aside from our perhaps smaller area. So University of Technology, we have to think about that application of our research. And to just come back to AI, AI has already changed the world. It touches almost every part of our world, certainly every time you turn your phone on, and is certainly going to do so for the foreseeable future. And there's real potential for absolute advancement and good, but also a risk of adverse outcome. But it is certain that there is much more to come. Misinformation is a challenge. This may be accelerated by AI. And ultimately, the challenge for us is how do we respond? Thank you, everyone, for listening.
So we don't have time for questions now, but I'm pretty sure that Brett will be hovering throughout the course of the day. And so if you do want to engage with some of, I think, the challenges I think that Brett has put to us, then I'm sure he would welcome that. For me, I will never look at toasters again in quite the same way. But I think that it's a really interesting and provocative question for us to think about: how do we prepare for a future that is as yet unknown? And what is our role in that as a faculty and as a University of Technology? So I'm going to close off this part of the session and invite Tom Stewart up, who is going to chair us for our next session. I'm going to hand over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Nick. Kia ora koutou, ko Tom Stewart taku ingoa. As Nick said, it's my privilege to chair the first presentation session of this year's roadshow. Just to explain a little bit how this session will run, it will be run very strictly because I'm chair. There are 3 presenters today. Each is about a 20-minute block or so, about 12-13 minutes presentation followed by questions. Within the room we have 2 microphones at either end. So if you do have questions after each presenter, feel free to raise your hand, and then we have members of the Faculty Research Committee with the microphones, and they can distribute them to whoever has questions. At the end of the 3 presenters, we have a special ending, which is one of our 3-minute thesis finalists. If you're not aware of the 3-minute thesis competition, the finals are actually tomorrow in the city in the afternoon. And across the entire university, there are 3 finalists that have been selected, and 2 of those are actually within our faculty. So we will be hearing from both of those speakers today. And I should actually mention the 3rd finalist in the economics department is actually co-supervised by Professor Scott Duncan, who is in our faculty, which actually means all 3 finalists are essentially from our faculty. So the first speaker this morning is Professor Lesley Ferkins, and Lesley is a Professor of Sport Leadership and Governance in the School of Sport and Recreation, and up until last year she was the Director of the Sprins Research Institute up at AUT Millennium. And I won't introduce Lesley's talk as she can do that, but what I will say is that the 3 talks are on this topic here, related to engaging with the community and other external partners. So it's my pleasure to welcome Lesley up to the stage.
That's me, yes. Jiggling, jiggling, jiggling. This is my clicker. Oh. Oh, this one. Okay, cool. Very good. Okay, so, called John Scott Te Waka, 1868, which is, I'm just getting used to these glasses on and off. 1868, which represents 7 generations of Pākehā to Aotearoa, English, Irish, Scottish and Welsh. Ko manga wekarawa, ko tukaranga ngā manga, ko Waitemata te Moana, I whānau mai a hau I Casta Bay, ko te raki pai whenua, Tokurohi, ko Devonport Kaingatahi, ko Pākehā te iwi, and also acknowledging mana whenua variously, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei, Ngāti Wai, Ngāti Paua, ko Lesley Ferkins tōku inga. So tēnā koutou katoa. It's absolutely delightful to be here talking about one of my most favourite topics in the world, the way that I do research. And you would have perhaps heard some of those words in my pipiha, which relate to the places that I feel connected to, where I'm from, Devonport, the Waitemata being my moana, and also the maunga that I feel associated with by living in Devonport, North Head and Mount Victoria. So that is a little bit about me. I actually feel quite short standing here. I feel like I need a bit of a step. I'm a bit too scared to come out and do the wander because I've got my notes, so I might just stay here. A bit about me, so now I'm revealing a bit more about me. I have been for most of my life chasing a mission around putting sport and education together and realising the benefits and opportunities that brings. And about 30 years ago, I met a woman who said the same thing to me, and we've pretty much been on that mission perhaps for the last 30 years, and probably most of you might know who that is. That would be Gay Bryan. You know, the power of research, the power of education, the power of sport, what if we put those together? And so we have been on this mission to do that. I grew up in a sporty family, no surprises there, and you know, I really have experienced some of the best of sport, and I spend my time now trying to leverage that opportunity for others by focusing on the development and growing capability within the organised sports sector. And I say that really deliberately because where I work and the places that I inhabit go far beyond the organised sports sector. In fact, I just met an old colleague, Rob, this morning, who's involved in the next presentation, which represents a previous work experience where I worked in recreation. So, you know, organised sport is but one component of our system, which is about health and physical activity and recreation and all in between. But I have spent most of my career focusing in on that piece, which is the organised sports sector. So that is a bit about me, where I come from, and my connections. I also wanted to just introduce, you know, therefore the purpose of this session, bearing in mind I have now about 13 or 12 minutes left to do so hurry up, Lesley. And really the purpose is to share a bit about the kind of research work that I do, which is on theme with research relationships and connections of this week, but also to do it in a way that I began thinking provocatively, and then I thought, well, you know what, that's really not me. I'm an inside-out change kind of person. Provocations for me are gentle nudges. They're not, you know, really challenging and pointing fingers. So you'll notice a gentle nudge around the considerations when we really do get inside and think about this thing called inside-out research, or inside-out change, as I have entitled it, and then kind of slightly provocatively for me, called it, is it real research? And so I wanted to just speak a little bit about the questions that you might have in your head when we do get really, really close to the people we are researching with. And I say that really deliberately, which contrasts the idea of researching on. So this is the purpose of the presentation. Now I have the green button, that's awesome. And I think we are ready to move to the next slide. I guess the final thing about this current slide is that I'm at the top of Mount Ventoux there, which is, we mountain biked up, you know, with the fat tyres up this very, very steep hill in France, which is part of the Tour de France, not during the Tour de France. And we could see nothing when we got to the top. And it kind of represents this idea of inside-out change and researching with, because you really don't know where you're going when you're trying to go. You just know that you're going with, and with the best intentions, you move forward. And that was the Mount Ventoux experience. So I thought I would pause a little bit just to, how long have I got, Tom? When do I need to stop talking? I got more, 10 minutes more. Cool. I would pause a little bit on, you know, what do I mean by inside-out change? For me, it's kind of has come innately. It's instinctive. It's inside me. But I guess it's not until recently that I've been able to probably recognise that it is a particular way of going about research that maybe isn't actually that common. I think we all probably in this room, by being at AUT and in this faculty, do elements of it. But I guess I would want to be encouraging you to think about your proximity to the things and the people that we are researching with as distinct to on, and how close are you really? And to think about whether you want to become a little closer, and if you did, what would be the implications of that? So for me, inside out change is getting really close to the people that we are researching with. And so for me, I'll share some examples in a moment about the sport organisations that I research with. So in those instances, they have been variously New Zealand Rugby, New Zealand Olympic Committee, New Zealand Cricket, New Zealand Tennis. I work a lot in the national sport organisation arena in governance and leadership, where I deliberately think about leadership being in everyone and everywhere, and that governance is a context of that. And so that's my context that I work within. And so when I try to get inside that door, you know, how is it that I do that, and why do I do that, and what is it that I find when I do? So that would be the first kind of description about what it is that I mean about inside-out change. It means getting in that door and sitting with and among to figure out the things that is going to help that organisation be better. And so, you know, some of the challenges to that might be, well, what about your objectivity? What about your bias as a researcher? How can you be so close and still see the things that you need to see? You know, aren't you in bed, therefore, and being sold? And will you be sport washing? You know, would be the main question in our domain, obviously the relative of greenwashing. And all of those things are relevant and fair questions. And I guess my response to that would be really aware of where you are. Be really aware of your proximity and your position and the implications of that as you set about your research. And also be really aware of the motivation of those that have invited you inside that door, whether you've knocked on it or you've been invited or you've snuck around the side. That's a real thing, by the way. That's not an AI. I don't think it's an AI generated. I was actually there. It's Waiheke Island, and it's the sculpture show, or the sculpture walk up Waiheke Island. Matiatia Bay is just there. So that's a real image. It's not a very good one because I've stretched it out, taken by my camera. So yeah, be really aware of the motivations of the people that have invited you in. Again, do they want to make them? Do they need you to make them look good, or are they genuinely interested in the mission that you're on, which for me, and as I said, Gay Brime all those years ago, was to help grow sports sector capability in leadership and governance so that the organised sports system can really leverage its opportunity to impact the well-being of New Zealanders, and in fact on the global stage, because we're so frigging good at sport, we have that power as well. So how does this approach contrast with other research approaches? Again, that's a real image. That's on Waiheke Island, the Matiatia clifftop walk. It's kind of cool. How does this approach contrast with other research approaches? You can imagine. I guess the main one is that word with instead of on. And yeah, it really is about the idea that you need to build those relationships, you need to create that understanding, and you have in your back pocket your research agenda and your research knowledge and background, but it's not necessarily the thing that you would lead with as you enter through that door and build those relationships and figure out how you might be able to help with the value that you bring, which is the value of academic scholarship and the way that we undertake our research inquiry. So again, I guess my points here that I'm speaking to are, you know, just for you to think about your proximity to the people that, or the things. I know we don't all work with people in the research that we do. You know, the proximity of that, and can you get closer because of the nature of the value of inside-out change. And Brett spoke to it in one of his quotes. You know, we're pretty stubborn when it comes to thinking about change, and therefore the idea of inside-out change is so much more of a powerful thing. We're not so good at being told what to do. We have to figure that out for ourselves if we are to change. So I'm going to give you some examples now. What the heck is she talking about when she talks about inside-out change and sports sector research and so on? I'm actually talking about a way of doing research which has a lovely label. It's called action research. You put research and you put action together, and you work with people to do a process or undertake a process of change and learning. It's called action research. I use it in most of the ways I go about my research with my colleagues and with my students and with the sport organisations that I work with. I don't always undertake a formalised action research process, but I always draw on the principles of action research, which begin with phases 1 and 2, relationship development, context analysis, understanding each other. Phase 3 is the action. What are we going to do together that's going to make this change, that's going to help advance what it is that you need, and we'll study that as we go, and then let's evaluate what we do at the end of a particular period of time. Those are basically the kind of phases of action research, and underpinned by the principles of collaboration, iterative change where you don't know necessarily where you're going, but you are following what's needed next, so that very emergent nature. And taking the action, doing something, making change as you go. And as you can imagine, all of that happening as you're researching and studying it creates some very powerful insights, but also drives that change as you're doing it rather than just at the end. So here is an example of this kind of way of going about research. And instead of me continuing talking and trying to explain this awesome stuff, I thought we'd show a video. So here it is.
Ua matsalupe le seunga. Ua au te tele le aso. I le afi o mai matala mai o au. Pa ie o mamalu le tatu au fia. Malu lava le soifu maua ma le langi e mama. Hirana whakaloflahi atu ni sambula vinaka.
When we look at the rugby playing population, it's really obvious there's a huge Pacifica element, and Auckland's such a diverse city with such a diverse population that we really needed to look at who was playing the game and who was governing the game. And when we looked at that, it became really obvious that the rich Pacifica playing population probably didn't match in terms of the governance, coaching or refereeing roles. So we started this little project called Navigating Two Worlds.
It was actually an awesome student project in partnership with New Zealand Rugby, with Auckland Rugby and with AUT Sports Performance Research Institute, or SPRINS. It became about embodying the best aspects of Pacific cultural approaches to leadership and helping New Zealand Rugby encourage off-field Pacific contribution.
What we were trying to understand is how do we look at things and do things so that more Pacifica can come in feeling confident about the skill set they have and be able to contribute in a sport governance position.
We were researching but also doing things. We had 3 elements. The first element was the establishment of a Pacific Advisory Group, and the Pacific Advisory Group really guided us through the entire research project.
If we had a deeper appreciation of what it means to be Pacifica, all of that enables us to think about how do we do things better.
We established a club leadership and mentoring group. 13 club chairmen interested in developing their understanding of Pacific culture.
Some principles that we touched on, really one of them is about embedding Pacifica perspectives of well-being. And we kind of think, well, what are some of the priorities that fall out of this in terms of embedding our Pacific values and impacts on our well-being?
And the third component was a Pacific leadership and mentoring cohort. Pacific people aspiring to become more involved in leadership within New Zealand Rugby, and we ran a number of workshops that helped understanding around Pacific culture and leadership development.
What I expected to get out of this project was how we would empower our Pacifica people to go beyond the grass. And I guess that starts with the mentors and the mentees that we have here. So I think we've set a platform to launch ourselves.
The Navigating Two Worlds project's brought about quite a bit of change, specifically around people's attitudes towards understanding that there are 2 different perspectives. And I've seen that grow quite organically. And to me, that's been the key learning. It's being able to understand from both perspectives how we all work together.
We need to be curious in listening to other people's stories and listening to other people's perspectives.
Everyone's got their own way of doing things. I guess if we knew how to merge them together, our interaction would be so much easier within the clubs.
We've seen some real growth and learning around how we can improve how the Pacifica community can participate, but also how the club system can respond and be a lot more inclusive and welcoming.
I'm currently the county's Manapō Steelers manager. Never would have thought that I would be in this position in terms of working in rugby. It's really afforded me some really great opportunities, both on and now off the field.
I'm looking around my club with a different angle on things and a better understanding of how my players at the club interact with each other and with myself.
It's not about trying to identify people's skill set necessarily. It's actually just about giving people the opportunity to belong and to contribute in little ways, and then you start to uncover people's true value.
This isn't just about rugby, what you're doing here. This is about Pacifica communities in New Zealand. The challenge isn't just to serve, but it is also to contribute positively.
It's really just the beginning. We've started this journey about 2 years ago, but we're nowhere near the end.
We can help others understand how we are, how we do things, and how we see things as Pacifica when it comes to leading, and understand how we can best move forward, not just the game, but the sustainability and the well-being of our communities.
Do I just leave it there while I talk? Okay. It's not going to go some YouTube thing that's going to be embarrassing. Very good. So you heard from Mike Hester there from New Zealand Rugby saying that this was just the beginning. And at the end of that particular project where we kind of ring-fenced, you know, a finish point, this is the challenge of end-to-end research projects working with to create change as you go. It's like, when's the end point? We did have an end point, and it got abruptly kind of ended in 2020 when we were all sitting in our houses and locked down. And we really didn't get the chance to have our final kind of report release and celebration. We planned it a couple of times, and it just didn't happen and wasn't able to happen. And then in 2020, was it 2, when the Auckland floods, this is so traumatic now, was it the Auckland floods in 2022? I was in Canada at the time, and in Mike Hester's office in Palau, all our reports sitting there waiting to be released about navigating 2 worlds, and I was thinking they're all going to get wet. They're going to be flooded because Parnell was flooded, eh? And they weren't flooded, they were flooded, but the reports didn't get wet. The reports are still there, and we still haven't released these pretty cool reports, you know, about this process. But you know what? I was thinking this morning, Gay, in the car as I was driving, it actually kind of doesn't matter, and it's kind of curious that we haven't been able to release, you know, and transition or translate our research, because the point of what we were doing was inside-out change, was to create the change as we were going. And yes, we want to capture it, and yes, we want to share it, as we've just done, because we want others who weren't involved to see and understand, but the power has been that inside-out change. And so here are several examples of some of the ripple effects, and they're quite huge rocks in the ponds, I would say. So the first one is that after navigating 2 worlds somewhat sort of dribbled out, Ronnie Clark was appointed as the first Pacific liaison manager for New Zealand Rugby. Then what happened was they established a Pacific Advisory Group to advise the board of New Zealand Rugby. Then what happened is that they've changed the constitution. You would have heard them in the media recently with constitutional changes. And so they've added in a Pacifica voice into their constitution that needs to sit on the board. And then finally, you know, we've had quite a few postgraduate students coming to us now who are Pacific and Māori, who have seen that or heard about it through the grapevine and have started to join the program of work that we're on. So when we do get to release the reports, Gay, it will be nice, but it kind of won't matter. So Tom, what have I got? How many minutes left? 30 seconds. All right, very good. The last couple of slides in 30 seconds are just really the idea of a follow-on effect, so on more ripples. So as we all do, we build on what our research platforms, don't we? And we sort of use that to go to the next thing. And that is what's happening. So working now with a governance community across New Zealand, with Kelly McCullum, who's doing a PhD in New Zealand Cricket, doing inside-out change to help their board become more inclusive and develop their leadership approaches. And so, one example and another example is working with the New Zealand Olympic Committee in a leadership development program where all, which is practice-led in the first instance, but has become a research opportunity. Is how I would describe that. So this is the Wahine Toa Leadership Program helping previous female athletes transition from being Olympians to whatever it is they need to do. So we've now got a PhD associated with it. We've got a research project up and running as with the previous. And just to give you a sense of this sort of practice-led approach, making sure that we have our eye on the parallel research outcomes. Just to call out a few sort of numbers in 3 seconds, 250 grand worth of external research funding has come our way through these programs. It's not been MBs or HRCs, but it has been industry funded projects. 150 pubs, publications, 23 postgraduate research completions. So this is not an either-or thing, right? This is real research, to use the title of my initial provocation, which you can tell hasn't really turned out to be that much of a provocation. It's been mostly about the sharing and encouraging for you to think about your proximity to where you stand versus your research field. So I'm going to finish with Marilyn Ferguson's quote. I recently come across her. She was born in 1938. She was an author, an actor, a scientific writer. Kind of resonates with what Brett said earlier about, we're cast in stone with our opinions, aren't we? And, where those opinions come from and how we do develop our worldview. And she very wisely said, no one can persuade another to change. Each of us guards a gate of change that can only be opened from the inside. And I thought that was extremely wise and kind of really sums up the nature of what I'm trying to convey here. And finally, in 5 seconds, I wanted to acknowledge the context with which I sit. AUT has been the most wonderful context to be able to do this because I felt incredibly supported and encouraged to be undertaking research where I'm seeking inside-out change, where I'm leading with the practice need and then following in with what the research can offer and doing it with and for those sport organisations. AUT is the place for it. It's New Zealand's only university of technology, and as Welby Ing said, that's a unique position that we have as critic and conscience of society, but we don't do it from the outside, we do it from the inside. The other context that I feel incredibly grateful for is the School of Sport and Recreation, which is just the most fertile ground for this way of thinking and doing. AUT Sprins up at AUT Millennium, where I'm based. The Human Potential Centre as well is a very important part of that and operates in this way as well, as does our research network, Te Kakano. And Te Kakano, there will be a poster in a area where you can learn a bit more about Te Kakano if you've always wondered what this research network is about. I encourage you to think, to go and have a look and look-see about that. So that concludes what it is that I have to say. I just wanted to acknowledge really in this final slide the context within which I'm able to operate. And I think the other thing would be the faculty is also very much on board with this way of working. Look at the way they have revised the funding opportunities to include events, to include relationship building, to include translation, and not just outputs. So we're in good hands with this way of working. And so I conclude with a widow to think about where your own proximity and to encourage you to nudge yourself a little closer. Kia ora. Tēnā tātou.
Thank you very much, Lesley. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but stay here as I have something for you. If you do have any burning questions for Lesley, please seek her out during the refreshments break after this session. But just to thank you for your contribution to the Research Roadshow, we have a gift here for you on behalf of the faculty. So thank you very much.
Cheers, Tom. Thank you. Awesome.
Next up, for our second speaker, I am very privileged to introduce Dan Tautolo, who is a professor within the School of Public Health, and he is the director of the AUT Centre for Pacific Health Research, or the Pacific Health Research Centre, and he is currently also the director for the Pacific Island Family Study, which you would have no doubt heard of. If you haven't, I'm sure Dan will mention it in his talk. So Dan, it is my privilege to welcome you up. Thank you.
Kia rana koutou katoa toa, mā lolosu for maua, malalangi e mama, whakalawhalai atu, and good morning everyone. It's a privilege to be here. First, I'd like to thank the organisers for the opportunity. Oh well, I'll call it opportunity. I didn't really have a choice when Nick asked me. So yeah, but it's great to be here. It's good to see so many people here, probably more than I thought. So thanks, Brett and Lesley, for bringing the crowd. I'm a professor in the School of Public Health, based out at the South Campus, out at Manukau. So it's a real privilege to make the journey or trek over the bridge out here in a lovely new building that we have here, Tukutuku. Yeah, maybe we'll get something like it out the South Campus one day. But we do have a swimming pool, so those who are interested, come and give us a visit. Just a little bit about me. I was born in New Zealand, born in Mangere. Spent probably the first year or so living in Samoa. My dad is from Samoa, my mother's from the Cook Islands, from the island of Tongareva, in the northern group of the Cook Islands. So yeah, just want to acknowledge them. My wife is from Niue, but currently we reside in GI, Glen Innes, in Tamaki, in East Auckland. So my talk today is about ensuring strong research impact and in terms of Pacific Health Research. And so I was going to talk a little bit about some examples from some of the work that we've done in Pacific Health, in our Pacific Health Research Centre. But first of all, I thought I'd just talk a little bit about some key areas of research impact. So how, research can have an impact in terms of improving the health and well-being for our Pacific communities in New Zealand. I guess first of all, capacity building is really important. So supporting Pacific researchers and building Pacific research capacity helps develop a skilled workforce that can continue to address community-specific issues in the future. I think it's also important it provides that opportunity for Pacific-led research, which is really key. And also opportunities at all levels, like not just leading the research, but collecting data, all of those kinds of things. And we've certainly been mindful of trying to do that in the work that we do, and having building Pacifica staff and Pacifica researchers. Secondly, in terms of health equity, as we all know, our Pacific community often face health disparities and barriers to accessing services. So research that's aimed at these communities can help identify and address these inequities, leading to better health outcomes in the future. Cultural relevance is also important. So research that incorporates specific cultural perspectives, values and knowledge systems, ensuring that the findings are relevant and meaningful for our communities. This approach also builds trust and engagement, making the research more effective. And in our case, in terms of the Pacific Islands Family Study, providing that sustainability for the future. The next one is around community empowerment, and just being mindful of involving Pacific communities in research, empowering them and giving them a voice in the decision-making process. So this participation helps ensure that the research addresses their specific needs and their priorities, not just our own. And then finally, probably the one people might be most familiar with in terms of impact, policy and practice. So the research can inform policies and practices that directly impact our Pacific communities. And providing this evidence-based recommendations from the research can lead to more effective interventions, support services, and better outcomes for our communities. The next part that I wanted to focus on in terms of the next part of the talk were just sort of three key themes in terms of Pacific research and the work that we do. And the first one is around the role of research in community wellbeing and the contribution it can make there. Secondly would be around the importance of community engagement and making sure that we do that effectively and in the most appropriate way. And then lastly, I thought about sharing, some of the strategies for effective community engagement that we've used in terms of working with our Pacifica families and communities. So in terms of the first one, the role of research and community wellbeing, research can be seen as a systematic investigation aimed at discovering new knowledge and understanding, which is crucial for improving community wellbeing as it provides evidence-based insights that inform effective policies, interventions, and practices. And probably one of the key examples for us in terms of the work that we've done here at AUT is the Pacific Islands Family Study. And information from the study has contributed in a number of domains and areas, particularly for our communities in terms of hearing, tobacco control, and also gambling behaviours as well. Now, for those who may not have heard of the Pacific Islands Family Study, I'll just give you a little bit of a brief sort of rundown of what it is. So it's a longitudinal birth cohort study of about almost 1,400 Pacific children born in the year 2000 at Middlemore Hospital in South Auckland. And so we recruited the kids and also their families, their mothers and fathers, to take part in the study, and we collect information from them on their health, development, education, all those kinds of things since then. So, they're roughly almost 25, they'll be 25 next year, and so we've got all of this information that we've been collecting and using to understand, what's going on with these roughly 1,400 families in terms of all of those health and wellbeing indicators and outcomes. So there's around 3,500 participants that take part in the study. We've got pretty good retention in the study as well. Only about 6% have actually dropped out, so no longer participate. The main reason why anyone may not provide us information at a particular collection wave is just because we haven't been able to get in contact with them. So we've got a number that live in Australia, probably about 300 families that live in Australia who we still try and maintain contact with. But generally, whenever we do find them, are able to contact them, they're more than happy to participate and share their information. As I mentioned, we collect information from not just the cohort children themselves, but also their parents. So it's really, a study of family units, and which is really interesting. It allows us to do, delve into some of these issues or things that may be affecting our families in a really deep way, an intergenerational, I suppose, sort of perspective as well, with the different sort of levels. So it's, really, really interesting. And the longitudinal nature of it allows us to look at trends and changes over time. So, for example, looking at things that may have happened for them when they were first born or in those first sort of 3 to 5 years of life, and then how, they're coping with things now as young adults themselves, 25, some of them having their own children also. Kind of as I talked about before, it provides a really solid platform in terms of building that Pacific research capacity. I myself first came to AUT as a doctoral student working on the study, and then have carried on in terms of management and leadership. We've had a number of Pacifica masters and PhD students, postdoctoral students that have come through. So it's been a real opportunity for us to build that platform to, go out and contribute in terms of Pacific Health research. There's a number of publications. There's a list of them on the website if you're interested in. And as I mentioned, looking at a range of topics and issues, particularly as the cohort has aged, so issues in terms of when they were younger, and then as they became adolescents, and then now moving on into their own sort of adult space. And it provides that opportunity to profile and raise the awareness of Pacific issues, so things that are going on for our communities and our families. What are the priorities for them, and the ability for us to collect information about some of those things and provide it to the people that are going to make policy decisions and policy changes as well. So the study's made a real contribution in terms of improving things for our Pacific communities and stuff, and we're really thankful and happy that we managed to secure funding for another 5 years. We were successful in getting an HRC program grant this year. So, we'll be going until at least the kids turn 30, or the cohort turns 30. So we're really looking forward to, what we're going to discover, working with our research partners and understanding what's going on for our Pasifika families in that space. So on to that, the second theme that I was quite keen to sort of look at, and that's the importance of community engagement in research. And one of the important things that we've found is that, I guess similar to what Lesley was talking about as well, is building those trusted relationships. It's really important in terms of ensuring, the success of your work, and not just for the project that you're working on now, but I guess also in terms of the future as well. One of the other things that's also we've found in terms of building those trusted relationships is they can often be the decider for our communities in terms of whether they want to actually participate or take part. So, we had a project where we looked at working with older Pasifika people, and we shared the consent forms, participation information sheets, all of that kind of stuff. But what it really came down to was the relationship with the team, was the relationship with who was engaging with them. And, while they were fully informed and agreed to take part, I feel like, one of the key deciding factors for them was that trusted relationship and having that. So it's really key, I think, in terms of ensuring that, the work that you're going to do is going to be effective and successful. Another thing to consider in terms of community engagement in Pasifika research is the importance of co-creation and participation. So involving Pacific leaders and community in the research process from inception to implementation and evaluation. So involving them from the beginning, not as an add-on at the end, or when you're looking at trying to assess outcomes or how successful the project has been. And that's been really important for us and a real focus for us, because some projects that we've worked on, we've engaged and we've started conversations around an issue or an area that we wanted to explore, and then we've found that, the community's priorities and issues are something totally different. So if we hadn't involved them in that early stage, we may have gone off down this whole track, spent all this money doing stuff and all of that, and at the end of the day, it's not going to be useful or valuable to them. So, by doing that, we were able to pivot or orient things that might have, included some of those things that they've identified as important. So that's why, I think having that involvement from the early stages is crucial. And the last theme I just want to talk about was strategies for effective community engagement. And I'm sure all of you are aware of, some of these things, and by no means is this an exhaustive kind of list, but one of the, key fundamental important things is just having that clear, open communication with the community throughout the process is essential. It's keeping them on board, keeping them engaged, and understanding what's going on and where things are getting to. Again, the importance of early and continuous engagement and building relationships with community leaders is also important as well. Because sometimes when you're working on projects and stuff with the participants, even they themselves are sort of uncertain and not sure whether this was something that they wanted to be part of and stuff. But if you've engaged with people that they trust in terms of leaders within their group, that can help you in terms of being able to get them on board and getting the project rolled out successfully. And then finally, some of the offering something valuable to participants. So being clear with them, what's going to be the benefit for them in terms of what you're doing. You've got your outcomes or things that you're trying to do, but how does that fit in with them, and how important and relevant is it for them? Probably with this one, the most important one that we've found recently is tailoring feedback to community preferences. So understanding what's the best way in terms of disseminating or sharing the information or findings and what you've done. In more recent phases, we've used infographics. Participants have talked about wanting to have just a one-page infographic thing that they can stick on the fridge. Helps them to explain to their families and what they've been up to and what they've been doing. Simple and easy to follow. And in other projects, we've looked at short videos, animated videos, and those kinds of things, which can go online and be shared with people. So, I guess just thinking about other ways of sharing information and engaging with them, as opposed to traditional journal articles and things like that. So that's pretty much all I've got to share with you, really, about Pacific Research Impact. It's just my details if you want any more information about some of the work that we do, and just acknowledging some of our funders. But thanks for the opportunity, and look forward to seeing you throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Dan. It's very thought-provoking around the importance of community engagement. As with Lesley, I have a gift for you from the faculty to thank you for your contribution. Here it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
For those wondering, it's just a little book that is wrapped in a ribbon, which means it's likely quite a good read. So lastly, I would like to invite our last speaker. So our last speaker is Bradley Case, who is working with Hannah Buckley, but Brad will be presenting on behalf of the team. Brad is from the School of Science with a specific focus in ecology. So Brad, I would like to welcome you up for the last speaking slot. And after Brad's finished, I will come back up and talk a little bit more about the next step in today's schedule. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the organising committee for inviting us over from science in the city. So kia ora koutou, called Brad Case, Takawingawa, and I'd first like to say that I'm presenting this on behalf of myself and Hannah, and we've been collaborating together on ecological and environmental research for probably over 20 years now. I just wanted to kind of offer an observation, I suppose, first of all, and that is that scientists are generally introverts. And we may not realize that when we first get into science, but that's probably the reason why we're attracted to science, is because we are introverts, a lot of us, and we actually want to do things that have nothing to do with humans. So this is kind of a little bit about our journey from going from, pure introvert to recognizing the importance of working with humans, even doing what we do in ecology. So I guess as part of our journey, we realized maybe in the last 10 years that in order to make our science impactful and meaningful, we needed to really think about collaboration. And first of all, that meant forming good collaborations with other researchers, and not necessarily other scientists. So that could be, you know, other people who can bring what they know that's different from us into our research and therefore make it richer and more useful. Also, we wanted our science to be useful on the ground. So where we could bring our ecological understanding and background to bear on problems that are facing us in the world. And so in order to do that, we realized it was essential for us to start listening to and partnering with people, with industry, with communities, with Mana Whenua. And I guess that's the topic of this talk. Sorry, how am I advancing the slide? This? Thank you. So we kind of distilled our learning. I hate the word learnings, so I'm going to say learning. Our learning down into three ingredients, I guess we call them, for turning science into impact. One is don't take humans out of the ecosystem. Two is be prepared to use some of your effort as scientists to address basic knowledge gaps that are going to push solutions to problems forward, that often these problems are urgent, and be honest about science's limitations as well, which is something that we've had to come to terms with. So we've worked a lot in agricultural ecosystems in New Zealand, and I want to use this kind of example to illustrate the 3 points that I just mentioned. We know that we're faced with a lot of problems currently, and everyone's aware of this. We have biodiversity loss, we have environmental issues in New Zealand, we have climate change impacts that are already showing themselves and are going to be accelerating as we move forward. So even though we have that, there's opportunities. So in New Zealand, you can see here on this map, about 50% of the country is farmland, so pastoral farmland. And there's a real big opportunity, which we kind of realized through collaborating with certain people. There's a big opportunity to make positive environmental change by working with landowners in these farming landscapes. So we've traditionally thought in New Zealand about biodiversity conservation, for example, as happening in our conservation land areas, right, which cover about 30% of New Zealand and are great. They're awesome places, and it is amazing that New Zealand has preserved so much of its land base for that purpose. But nonetheless, a lot of the problems we're facing aren't in those areas. They're in farming areas. They're in our lowland landscapes, where humans have caused a lot of modification to the land. But also it represents, therefore, some opportunities for integrating and collaborating into these communities to make some positive change. So even if you consider sheep and beef cattle farmland, which is about 43% of New Zealand's land area, we found that this land area, for example, holds about 25%, about a quarter of our remaining native vegetation in the country. So that was a bit of work we did a few years ago, and that was a statistic that wasn't known. So that's actually quite a lot of native vegetation that's supported by these lands that we kind of think of as, highly degraded, and they are in some respects. And on top of that, these areas have 17% of New Zealand's woody vegetation, which of course was the predominant land cover type before humans arrived in New Zealand. So about 95% of New Zealand was covered in forest. before people arrived. So again, there's these opportunities here to work in these landscape with partners to enhance both biodiversity but also resilience to what's coming to climate change. So this figure gives you a bit of an idea about what we see on sheep and beef farms in New Zealand in terms of the woody vegetation, composition, and structure. We may not really think about it much. We just drive through our landscape and we don't really notice some of these areas sometimes. But all of these pieces of vegetation provide, significant habitat and potential for biodiversity conservation. And they're also useful for things like carbon capture and sequestration and contributing to resilient lowland landscapes in New Zealand. So these results, the fact that farms hold all of this important habitat and native biodiversity that can contribute to mitigating some of our problems, in my opinion at least, it provides a way in. Right, so if you present things to people that maybe they didn't know, then it's a way in to initiate conversations about the way we can move forward. And we can do that with landowners about biodiversity. What are their motivations about conserving biodiversity on their farms? What are they willing to do? Those types of things. Okay, number one, don't take humans out of the ecosystem. And it's sort of a no-brainer, I guess, but typically we've done a lot of our science away from humans. We can go into the bush or we can go into the lab and we can do lots of things and generate lots of nice publications and things like that. But the reality is that humans are the main drivers of change in our landscapes, and therefore they need to be part of the solution. So we've learned that we've needed to work with a range of partners, so farmers, landowners, Mount Whenua, industry partners, to find win-win solutions. So we're not going to find a solution that's going to necessarily be perfect for everything, but the idea is we're going to find solutions that can support, say, things like native biodiversity restoration and ecosystem functioning, but also allow people to make a living off the land. So that's the key bit, is that we have to work in to recognize all of those perspectives. And some of our research has shown that that's possible. The key is to listening and understanding what people's aspirations are. Here's another, more recently I've been involved in this project with the Department of Conservation up north in Doubtless Bay in Northland. It's part of their Ngā River restoration work that they're doing. And with this work, they're working closely with communities in catchments across New Zealand and to seek basically these types of win-win outcomes for improving river health, but also, I guess recognizing that people have to make, livelihoods off the land around those rivers. And my role as a scientist was to come in and do some analysis and provide possible options for decision making. But of course, those are just then options. And so the next step, obviously, is to present the options and then ultimately allow the community to make the decisions around what are the priorities for them. So here's part of the catchment areas that we're working in up north. You can see there's a lot of things going on. There's flooding, there's erosion, there's stream bank erosion, there's poor river quality, and possibly high fire risk in this landscape. So those are the types of things that I can evaluate as a scientist. But I guess I'd like to just say that we're now kind of in this post-normal science era. All that term means is that we have to move past just doing science for the sake of science. We've got to move now into this period of urgency where we need to apply what we know as best as we can to solve problems. And it's probably not going to be perfect, but we know enough to be able to do something. But ultimately, any decisions that need to be made, for example, how do you intervene in this landscape to build resilience, to improve biodiversity, to improve river health? There are many things you could do, but ultimately it has to come back to the priorities of the community, what they're willing to do, what they can afford to do, all of those types of things. So there needs to be recognition of values, perspectives, knowledge systems, worldviews, and also economic realities. And this requires transdisciplinary approach because these are wicked problems, and we're not going to solve this with science alone. So the second thing we think is key to making an impact is being able to use science to address knowledge gaps. And it's kind of like, what do we urgently need to know now? And how can we do things to learn what we need to know now to make decisions now? And, we can't go and do great ecological research everywhere. It's just too complicated. It's going to take too long. But we can do enough research in some places to fully understand something that's going to be useful and to fill knowledge gaps. And so one way we can use ecological research more effectively is to design specific projects to fill those data and knowledge gaps, and also how to work with people in doing that to translate the knowledge into something useful. And this is where we've established our AUT Living Laboratories forest restoration experiment, and some of you may have heard of that already. So we established that in 2019 with some funding from AUT and some external funders. And that was for this purpose. It was really to fill these basic knowledge gaps that we have about our own native tree species in New Zealand. And it's hard to believe we don't know things about our own native species, but there's a lot we don't know, actually, about how they grow, what their growth rates are, how successful they will be if you plant them on farmland, those types of questions. And again, that's not just a science question. These aren't just science questions. They're questions that require other perspectives to actually get a richer view of what the answers to those questions might be. Okay, and finally, I'd just like to make the point that if science was going to solve all of our problems, it would already have been solved. So we have to recognize that there's limitations to science as it stands alone. And so the third ingredient is about acknowledging science's strengths and weaknesses. But I guess our point is if we connect science then with social scientists, with education researchers, with mātauranga, then we start being able to do things that we couldn't do before. For example, social scientists can use science to create people-centric solutions, and education researchers can turn science into learning tools. Mātauranga informs how science can be designed, applied, and made meaningful to communities in mana whenua. And Indigenous researchers and social scientists are always coming up with new ways to apply even scientific thinking into more meaningful solutions for communities. And so this is where we're going to be able to make this impact, is in this way, in this kind of translational, transdisciplinary sort of way of looking at things. So for us, what next is about engaging with people, engaging people in what we're doing, including children and school students and our students here at AUT and other collaborators, so that we can make a positive difference for people and planet. And we have a stall this afternoon at 3:30. I'll put a plug in now for that. So our AUT Living Laboratories has a booth. Please come and talk with us. And we're more than willing to hear if anyone is keen on collaborating with us on some of that work. So please come and have a chat with us. So we'd just like to thank our funders and our collaborators, all of our partners and helpers. The AUT Living Laboratories project in particular has been a beast of a project to organize, and we've had a lot of people involved in that project, and we'd like to acknowledge all of them. That's supposed to be a video that's playing right now, but I notice it's not. But this is our Porewa Living Labs site in the center city in Orake, and we've co-designed this site in conjunction with Ngāti Whatua Orake. And this is about 4 or 5 years now after planting this site. And we're quite happy to bring people out there and have a look around if you're interested. Or if you want to plant some trees or do some work, we can put you to work as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brad. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but given you already put a plug out for your exhibition later this afternoon, I encourage you to ask Brad questions then. I also have a gift for you, like the other presenters. Thank you so much. Thanks. I would now like to invite Ryan Howard up to introduce himself. While he's making his way up, I will just say to Ryan, it would be great if you could introduce yourself briefly, and by briefly I mean briefly. One thing that I quite like about 3-minute theses is that the 3-minute time limit is not negotiable. So I'll get you to introduce yourself now, and we might have time for maybe one question afterwards. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I promise this will only take 3 minutes. My name is Ryan Howard. I'm a student here at AUT in the School of Science in Kat Bolstab's lab, where we study deep-sea squid ecology and systematics. So I'm originally from California, came to beautiful New Zealand because it's kind of a hot spot for squid biodiversity for many factors I don't have time to go into right now. But yeah, I study deep sea squid vision specifically, so kind of how they navigate the deep sea in these really low lit environments. I'm nearing the end of my PhD in my research, and so I'm starting to have some really cool findings, and I thought the 3-minute thesis would be a really fun way to share just a small sliver of some of the cooler findings that I've been recently discovering. And so yeah, I think with that, I think we can give it a go. I hope you enjoy. Imagine living in a world with crushing pressure, near freezing temperatures, and eternal darkness, but still relying on your eyes to find food and avoid being eaten. It's fascinating to think any animal can see in those conditions, yet every day billions of squids use vision to survive in the deep sea. My research is aimed at understanding the adaptation squids have evolved to be visually successful in the dark. The first clue to understanding why squids have excellent vision can be found in their similarity to us, humans. The closest common ancestor between humans and squids resembled an eyeless worm that lived nearly 600 million years ago, and yet we have both independently evolved the same camera-like eye design. Let me explain that. Inside traditional cameras, light imprints an image of your subject onto film. Similarly, inside camera-type eyes, light imprints an image of the environment onto a retina. However, the retina works a bit differently than film. In the retina, microscopic photoreceptor cells use a protein to convert light into images you, or a squid, might see. Except squids are colorblind. They have a single visual protein that is tuned to optimally absorb a specific wavelength of light based on the needs of the species. That absorbance can be measured and tells us which color of light the squid is most sensitive to. Now you might be wondering, how can squids see in the deep when there's no sunlight? Well, light in the deep sea can be created by bioluminescent organisms. In fact, the deep sea is so large that bioluminescence may be the single most used form of communication on Earth. Many species of squids also use bioluminescence, including a genus of large squids found in New Zealand known as Taningia, which have the largest bioluminescent organs in the animal kingdom. about the size of a lemon. However, while bioluminescence in the ocean is blue, surprisingly, the bioluminescence from Taningia is a yellowish-green color, seen here on the left. Occasionally, specimens are collected from fishing bycatch and brought to the lab where I can extract the visual protein from the retinas and measure its absorbance. And what I found is fascinating. It seems Taningia have tuned their vision to better see the same yellowish-green light their bioluminescence emits. Since squids are colorblind, Taningia would perceive their bioluminescence as light brighter than what other squids would see, like the figure shown here on the right. This suggests that Taningia use their unique combination of vision and bioluminescence to communicate over vast distances underwater, while allowing their light to remain relatively imperceivable to predators that are not well attuned to see light from the green to yellow spectrum. These findings are significant because the 2020s have been declared the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development by the United Nations. Never has humanity explored the deep sea as vigorously as we are right now, which requires equipment outfitted with bright white lights that can damage the eyesight of nearby animals, including squids. Reconfiguring our deep sea lighting systems to emit wavelengths of light that squids are most sensitive to, such as light from the green to yellow spectrum in the case of Taningia, could prevent us from injuring passing individuals. It's a sentiment I'm sure that Taningia will appreciate. After all, it's already hard enough to see in the world as dark as the deep sea. Imagine living in...
Thought you were about to go again then. Thank you, Ryan. I also have a gift for you. Even though your presentation was shorter than the others, you still get the same gift.
Yes. Next pages.
I would now like to invite Nada, Associate Dean Postgraduate, up to the front, just to prepare us for moving into our refreshment break. So Nada will bless the food with a quick karakia. Thank you.
Kia ora, ko Nara Signal Aho. It's my pleasure to share with you a kai karakia for our day, because if you're like me and you've got a little obsession with the chocolate-covered profiteroles, you will go back to the table many times. So, me karakia tātou. E rongo, ho mai nā tipu. He whaka ki te tinana, he oranga, o eki, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora everyone.